Hey everyone, I guess it's still morning, so good morning to everybody. My name is Jim Perkins. I'm a product manager at Salesforce, where we sell our cloud software products to the government. That's what I focus on. Outside of work, I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve. I've worn a uniform for plus or minus 20 years. And I'm mostly just a giant nerd. Occasionally I go running in the woods and do things like that. Thank you all very much for being here. I'm going to introduce the rest of our panelists and have us jump right into a very exciting discussion about data analytics and energy security. So to my left immediately is Tim Kang, Director of Global Intelligence at Strider Technologies. Tim joined Strider in 2020, leading the development of several products. As the Director of Global Intelligence, he specializes in creating tailored analytics solutions for client needs. Previously, he was a financial analyst at the Department of the Treasury and focusing on global capital flows and the bond market. Super interesting stuff, but I'm sure it is actually. Tim also worked at the U.S. Trade Representative's Office during Section 301, investigating the PRC's trade practices. He has over 8 years of experience in China, serving as a human and resources consultant and talent recruiter in manufacturing and finance. He holds degrees from Johns Hopkins SAIS as well as UCLA. Sitting next to Tim is Matthew Hart, who's the head of product at Octarus Technologies. Matt has over a decade of experience in the intelligence community, Department of Defense, and Special Operations Forces, specializing in advanced analytics and targeting. As a U.S. Navy veteran, go on and beat Navy. Sorry about that. I just really have to. I have to stick to my guns. It just comes out naturally. And a former crypto warfare expert, he supported global intelligence operations, including in Indo-PACOM analyses, counterterrorism in Africa, and cyber network analysis with U.S. Cyber Command. He was recognized as the NSA Hawaii's Analyst of the Year, and Matt deployed as a Somali linguist during operations like Octave Quartz. And at Octarus, he develops analytic platforms for the public and private sectors. And then last but not least of the brilliant panelists up here is Frank Burham, Senior Vice President for Innovation at ITA International. Frank is a seasoned executive with over 30 years of experience in data analytics, cybersecurity, and advanced technology solutions. At ITA, he leads initiatives in human and augmented, data-driven decision-making systems for critical infrastructure and defense. Definitely going to be a huge contributor on this panel. This includes the Navy's Availability Management Suite, AMS, and he has pioneered the frameworks like the Mission Aware Framework and PRISM, enhancing cyber resilience and operational risk assessment for distributed systems. With advanced degrees in computer science, Frank's work addresses emerging threats to national and homeland security. Folks, this is really all you're going to hear from me today, other than some questions I'm going to prompt and maybe rein them back in on the discussions here. For this panel, we're talking about data analytics and energy security, and I realize that those together might be 4 buzzwords in a 5-word couplet. So we're going to take a moment to break that down for a second. Data analytics is the ability to leverage data to generate unique insights about, in this case, energy security, which as a double entendre can be both stable energy production for consumers, but also security of energy. So cybersecurity, resilience, threat detection, and vulnerability assessments, supply chain optimization. Net, this really is driving towards grid resiliency, efficiency, reliability, stability, sustainability, security. Many, many benefits as the demand for energy continues to grow, as populations go up, and electronic devices continue to proliferate. So my first question to the audience, just as a quick show of hands, who is in the data science, data engineering field? Does anybody here do machine learning, data science? We are definitely not going to get into like Splunk queries and other things like that, but I'm just trying to get a show of hands of who does this. All right. Presumably everyone else here is on the energy security side, energy or security side of the house. Should we go with the more aggressive approach and flip the script? Do we want to do that?
Whatever you like.
All right. Contrary to normal conventions with panels, we actually want to check in with all of you. Are there any hot burning questions on this topic that you want us to front load? There don't have to be. We understand that this is awkward, but I'm going to let this awkward silence play out for about 5 more seconds. You had your chances, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. I know we've been at this conference. There's been a tremendous amount of, I'll call it doom and gloom. Security threats are all around us. But before we jump into the doom and gloom here, what do each of you see as some of the top opportunities for data analytics and energy security? Tim, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I was going to start with some doom and gloom, but now you're pulling me back to some positives here. So let me try to scrounge this up. So I do see that there is still an early window of opportunity to address some of the things that I want to talk about, which is solar power, wind power, inverter-based resources that are being installed in this country. And I think we're still early in the game. We're still less than 10% of energy is being produced through distributed energy resources and inverter-based resources. And we can stop some of the stupid things that are going on with this space before 2030, where it will be about 15, maybe 20% of our energy will be produced using inverter-based resources. So I think we have an opportunity here to turn some things around and nip things in the bud. And I will go ahead and explain a little bit more later during this panel.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Yeah, so as we look at the advent of the technologies that we're starting to implement and across not only the energy sector, but across the entire globe, we're in a data boom where we have exponential data growth every single day. We're creating more and more data than we've ever seen before in the entire history of man at a scale and rate that is unprecedented. The nice thing about that is that we're also on the same side in the AI and ML analytics fields, producing and developing models at a rapid enough scale to start to deal with that data. The difficulty there is implementation. It's getting those models, getting the people that are really, really smart about the topics to create the things and create the panels and dashboards that we all need, and do it in a way that is deployable in a secure environment so that we can follow on with that energy security and make sure that everything's, above board and we can continue to work. But if we do that at the scale and pace of a lot of government regulations and implementations, we're going to continuously lag behind. So using that data that we have building up, as well as the developments in AI and machine learning to implement those at a rapid enough scale, that's where we can gain that competitive advantage and maintain the security of our energy grid.
So this is the positive one, right?
This is the positive
Okay,
one.
okay, we'll go with positive. So here's the way to think about it, or at least the way I do. I mean, I listened to everyone speak in all the panels, and they were really great. And it was clear a number of things. Number one is there's a lot of data. That's the big one. Everything, including evidently wood poles, create data, which that was a new one I had not heard of before. But what really strikes me about it is this. When you think of it, we've traditionally thought of data sitting somewhere. But really what we're seeing is very large data flow. Data is endlessly flowing out of these electrical whole infrastructures, critical infrastructure and whatnot. And so it really is sort of trying to fire hydrant through a straw to some extent, because there's so much coming at us. And as Tim said, we're talking about this idea that we're getting AI, we're getting the ability to actually do real-time or near real-time, on-the-fly analysis, link it back to older data sets, and to get into those older ones as well, using AI, advanced analytics, modeling, large language models, all the things you've heard, all in combination. I mean, that's a really positive thing. I think we can make some headway. And we need to make some headway in older things too. So for example, one of the things that came up yesterday during Mr. Ring's talk was this idea that they sit in your network and hang out for a long time, right? And I think that's a data flow problem at some point. Our ability to actually monitor networks at scale on long-going pieces as they get into our networks and kind of hang around for a little while, because they're not big signals coming through the data flow, they're small signals coming in. And our ability to do that is really going to ultimately hinge on probably the next crop of AI and high-speed computing that's coming. And that's what we're really seeing. And I think that's a positive thing. Drawback, I think, to it, if I can throw that in there, is the data centers to processing those are really getting to be expensive, and they're getting in the gigawatt range. Memphis, they're projecting between 1 to 2 gigawatts of power. That's a city, and so we're going to have to balance what can we do and afford against can we generate enough energy to run this stuff. So
that's it. That's a great question to bring back data analytics and energy security of can we actually provide the energy for the compute power to do the analytics,
You want me to
no, go ahead.
tackle that? Yeah. So what we've traditionally spent computational power on in AI and AI models is in training. And y'all have heard this in the news, but really what training is, if you can imagine most of the usable data on the internet being basically sucked into a computer center, and they're using it to train models. So anything you can sort of read, anything you can sort of watch, be it static image, video, all that's being used to train models. Super expensive because you're running these data centers in the 150 megawatt, 200 megawatt kind of level, and all that training takes time. Takes a lot of time. Well, we're moving to something that's slightly different, and I heard DeepSeek mention, which maybe the most interesting thing to me is that we're moving in these reasoning models. Now, reasoning is interesting. Now, everybody's probably played a little bit with ChatGPT, so it's kind of nice to get information back from, but reasoning is super interesting because there are chains of reasoning, and it will explain to you why it's making certain connections in the data. And that's a really good news thing because AI is really starting to really get enhanced. It's a really bad news thing because it takes at least 4 or greater times the computation to do that. And so that's the drawback.
And then on that, I think as we look, and specifically as I look at data in a day-to-day environment, data by itself is almost useless without analytics. And for pretty much anybody in here that works in a data sphere or works in anything where you have a dashboard display, chances are probably that the last thing you want is another item on your dashboard to monitor. So getting analytics from data is great, but being able to provide insight from those analytics, that's what is actually needed to make action. So taking that and trying to use things like reasoning models to short cycle from analytics to insights is really what's going to propel and accelerate the technology over the next couple of years.
And if we're going down the line this way, I'm going more analytics this way, more data that way. And so as an analyst, we're trying to create insights for our clients. It is a lot more difficult to work with data sets that are clumsy and unstructured and so free text based. And so in a lot of ways, analysts like me try to simplify the data as much as possible so that a human can digest it and produce insights from it. I think with the proliferation of so much data, that is becoming more and more difficult. And so at least for this panel, I'm going to try to focus on a very small sliver of data sets coming from China and a very small sliver of operational technology called inverters. And hopefully, I will be able to make some sense out of energy security at the same time here.
I think one of the things you're all coming back towards is as we are applying a vast amount of compute power towards a vast amount of data, the next step that we're probably not nearly at yet because of how far behind we are with technology adoption is getting towards agentic AI in these systems. So whether it's for analysis, for security, for stability, sustainability, performance, getting to that, but we'll come back to that. You each sort of both provide an opportunity and then sort of the limitation or the concern that you have. Take a little bit more, Tim, starting with you, just tell us more about inverter-based systems and sort of what the threat is you're seeing there.
So at Strato Technologies, we very simply we collect open source from adversarial nations, and then we process it and then turn it into intelligence for governments, research institutes, and industry. And among the industry that we serve is energy and utility companies. Taken together for this project, this research that I'm doing, I spoke to all of our energy and utility clients. Together, they make up approximately about 15% of our installed capacity in the United States. So it's a pretty significant amount of power generators that I'm speaking to. And one of the chief concerns was PRC, cyber intrusions, and hacking into our critical infrastructure, especially our power systems. And so working with the data set that I talked about, a very small data set I'm talking about is corporate registry data from China and trade flows on specifically this inverter-based resources, especially inverters coming from China into the United States. That's the small sliver of data I'm working with. So the reason why I and many of the industry partners are concerned about inverters coming from China is because they're so dominant. Number one, more than half of the added grid capacity in 2023 and 2024 were inverter-based resources, wind, solar, battery energy storage systems, right? This is only going to grow as we pivot to renewable energy. Unlike conventional energy systems, where a lot of that was not really built in China, those are older systems that are built here in the United States and from our allied nations. But solar, wind, completely dominated by China. Everybody knows this, right? And so I started to dig into some of the numbers. I surveyed our energy and utility clients, and I just asked voluntarily if they wanted to send me some of their suppliers of their inverters within not only their own solar farms, but power purchase agreements with their distributed energy resources. Like, as you have them available, please go ahead and send me who you're buying your inverters from. And then I started to map out basically across the United States where the inverters are coming from. First of all, from the macro data, China is, of course, completely dominant in this space, just crushing Mexico, Thailand, like there's no competition, right? And then so looking at the supplier data from our clients, I saw that at least 80% uses inverters made by this one company. You might have heard of them, called SunGrow. And then 50% or more use inverters that are made by a very famous company called Huawei. And I was like, wait, aren't we ripping Huawei equipment out of our 5G systems now? Why are we installing them into our solar grid system? Like, why is that a thing still? And then so like this kind of sense of like flabbergasted outrage started to kind of come inside me, and then started to look more into the data sets here. And the dominance of SunGrow and Huawei inverters within our own grid is pretty astounding. They're about 60 to 70% of the prices of the Israeli-made ones, the US-made ones, right? They work just as well, but then they have coding and design done in the PRC, right? By a company that we've banned in other systems because of national security concerns. So this unevenness of our policy was what brought me here today.
So if I may, I think one of the questions I would have for you on that is how long did that identification and an analytic process take to really figure out those percentages and what it's been for the last 2 years?
Yeah. It didn't take very long. First of all, because of our energy utility company clients, they're quite eager to share this data and also collate it within Strider so that we can disseminate it to them again. So it took about 6 months, but it was that 6 months was mostly our clients talking to legal and asking, can we share it with Strider? I mean, like that was it.
Right. And so during that 6-month period, how many more inverters were brought into the country?
I don't have the right numbers for this, man.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at there is that every single new piece of technology we introduces new vulnerabilities, and the process and the time it takes us to identify the vulnerabilities and then make them actionable, especially if you're looking at government regulatory frameworks, from identification of a new CVE until it is given a CVE name and number, can be 90, 120, 180 days, that vulnerability has existed in our infrastructure without any method of implementation. Whereas companies like yours, companies like a lot of the ones in the room, have that data available long before it ever makes it into a government regulatory framework. And if we're not working with private industry and using those resources of the people that are identifying it day in and day out, and we're waiting it to filter up to the government, an implementation plan to be generated, and that implementation plan to come back down, we're now a year to 18 months behind the actual vulnerability that exists in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's maybe to clarify a little bit of what's being said here, we have companies that are creating this that we know have been bad actors against us. There's not a question, right? We got like good evidence in this space. But we also have a lot of products that are going into our electrical grid, our critical infrastructure, and quite frankly, all of our infrastructure, and even into your home, that if it's got a chip on it, maybe the main chip wasn't made in China, but one of the subordinate chips were made in China. And so what occurs is that it's rational to think, and we know from a lot of history, that those chips have potentially for backdoors or to cause interruption. One of the two, right? A back door, or it can be shut off, or it can just cause some sort of degradation of service. And it's everywhere. And so that's the hard message, right? And the question is, what do we do about it? And we got into a conversation when we were first getting together. It's like, I don't know, what's the energy grid worth? $1 trillion? I don't know. Taking a guess, give or take. How do you rip that out and put new chips in it and new stuff? And the answer is you don't, right? You do the best you can to guard it. You pull out the stuff you can. You don't buy from suppliers that are tainted. And we just heard a panel about logistics doing that. But this is the reality that we have to learn to live in. And in really, in my mind, cyber has always kind of taken a defensive approach, and we do talk a little bit about the offensive. But in my mind, I think the whole systems, and I heard this from Dominion, which I really was encouraged about, is that you're really taking what the military would call a mission assurance approach. That means that we know that part of our infrastructure may very well degrade or fail. Okay, but our overall infrastructure is being built to assure the mission. In the case of Dominion, energy, power to our homes and businesses. And really, I think we have to take that idea across everything. And this is more of a military concept, but the reality, that's what we got to take across all America's industries.
I'll second that. Excuse me. When you look at things like, again, on the energy panel, Dominion, it's great that they're doing regular red teaming, things like that. And the energy grids across the country are constantly red teaming their infrastructure. But prior to a red team, you're going to have an agreement set in place with the agency or the team that's going to red team your infrastructure that says what they can and can't touch. Unfortunately, our adversaries don't give us contracts of what they will and will not touch during a red teaming event where they try and access us. So when you do things that stop any sort of disruptions that may, I think one of my favorite ones I saw recently was there was a company that decided to do a Friday afternoon email phishing test, and they said to send a link for bonus projections for the year. Everyone's going to click that, right? So not following some of those frameworks, or in this case, following the frameworks that we set up during red team events, we're actually hampering ourselves, and just solidifying known pathways instead of looking for the alternate pathways into the energy grid.
I'm actually thinking, just the example you gave, still processing that one. So Frank, you talked about the question is, what should we do? And I just want to unpack this, further. I think in the conversation we had before, we actually sort of wrapped up at the, what should we do? Where should we start? Or possibly, how would we approach thinking about where to start?
I think this is where analytics comes back into the, we're an analytics panel, so we had to come back to analytics sooner or later. The reality is, over time, over some previous work that I've done, I've looked at things like, how do you look at risk at scale, right? Because we tend to look at risk by system or subsystem or whatnot, but what does risk at scale look like? And risk at scale looks kind of scary sometimes, because fifth order effects can ripple up and have second and first order effects. And that's where we see similar analogy is when we've seen things like trading systems feed off of each other and ultimately bring the market down, where those were unintended consequences of trading systems monitoring each other and just kind of like ticking down the price of the stock market. Well, similar systems are sitting around monitoring all sorts of infrastructure. And of course, we have human in the loops in many of these systems, certainly critical infrastructure. But the reality is over time, they're getting harder and harder to manage, more and more automated. And so at some level, we have to get a better understanding of what it means to think about risk across this infrastructure. I did some work at one point looking at risk across war theaters. And what can you do in that complex? And it's a really hard problem because there's a lot of movement. If you look at our infrastructure, it's everywhere. I will tell you, there are some things that we can do that are smart. Okay, can I tell you an example of something that was dumb? Okay, so a number of years ago, I was asked to look at to come up with an example for a presentation, and this presentation had to be in a large major city of the U.S. I won't tell you where it is because if I told you, y'all would all be really sad. But they said, can you come up with a place where just regular data can be turned into cyber? Went to the city, looked around on the internet, found their contractor site, right? They were contracting for 6 major transformers to be replaced in their metro system. Okay? On the internet, this was in the last 10 years. They had the geo point of every one of them. They had every hut. They told you how to enter the hut. They told you where the camera was. They told you it was on the panel. They even told you the IP addresses of the devices on the side. Like that was available online without a login as part of their procurement process. So think about that for a minute. Now, I know we've probably done a lot in the last 10 years to lock some of that stuff down, but that's probably still out there, that data, and that data is a very, very strategic city in our country. And so that's the kind of stuff that's sitting out there. If you're China or Russia or someone like that, that's gold.
I hate to tell you, we haven't gotten better.
And
That
here's,
data's still absolutely out there in almost every aspect, not only for us, but globally.
and it doesn't take like a rocket scientist to figure it out. I mean, one of those huts happened to be in the middle of a big transit with like multiple flyovers and that kind of stuff. It's sitting in the bottom, you know, it's driving the outreaches of the metro system, and you're thinking, there's the target. Rush hour, you couldn't get to that thing. You couldn't get any response to that hut in under an hour in rush hour.
So just go a little bit further into that. I'm the least qualified person to be at this table right now. So, you know, we've seen Jen Easterly and CISA, you know, really establish a much larger presence and take a lot of action to provide increased security and regulation for security of our critical infrastructure. But where are we falling short, or, you know, what are the next opportunities for them to, you know, lead as an agency and help drive us to address issues like this?
I would say to your comment about risk is when you start looking at things from a much broader and bigger scale, you start factoring in acceptable risk. And when it comes to energy infrastructure, acceptable risk really should be zero, but it isn't. And that's across pretty much any domain in the US. Because if one city goes down, that may be an acceptable risk in the calculus of a nation, but for every single person living in that city, that's not an acceptable risk.
Okay.
If it goes down for 3 to 5 days.
So I have another question,
Sure.
and this one's a little spicy.
Okay.
The risk, we always talk about zero risk or mission critical, no fail mission, things like that. Coming from a national security background, I like to say the risk of doing nothing, it grossly outweighs the risk of doing literally anything at this point. With the age of our systems, the way our processes work, a variety of, you know, however you want to apply this. And so this idea of like, we can't accept that risk in many ways almost says, well, there's nothing you can do about it either, because every alternative is also going to have risk with it.
Yeah,
So
this is where mission assurance as a concept is really superpower, right? The idea that you know your systems are going to degrade, right? The idea that you know that you got to be able to recover and, you know, fight and keep providing whatever service you're going to do. I mean, those are critical ideas. It's a different way of thinking of the world, right? You know, when a bunch of military folks here, right, when you're fighting, you may reduce some sort of capability in your fight, but you still got to do the fight. Okay, I'm not saying it's hopeless, but what I am saying is we are going to leverage probably more and more analytics, deeper and deeper algorithms to actually help with the fight and try to figure out where to zoom in on the problems, and that's going to be for the foreseeable future. You ask what could we do? Well, we didn't plant a tree 30 years ago. Right, that's the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is we should have built this stuff, you know, in the early 90s when we were building out the internet, and we could really put some real security structure in there. But we didn't. But we have what we have today. And you think the energy system's bad enough, imagine lifting all the software in the world, which is even a bigger problem. You know, my concern, one of the concerns I have on those things, so like in AI, like the opposite side, yesterday during the lunch discussion, he made a comment that was really kind of interesting, that China has the same number of cybersecurity people, like offenses was the implication, that the rest of the world has. Okay? They're all probably equipped with something like QREN, which is one of their, you know, software development pieces of machine learning. So not only are there cybersecurity specialists, they got language models that can write software that's probably pretty good enough. So imagine a team that big writing software against an infrastructure our size. I mean, those are the kind of things that we really are facing.
And only one of them has to work.
Yeah, and only one of them has to work. And that model is actually quite good at writing pretty good software. And the difference is that's a Chinese model, so it doesn't have the constraints that American model is going to have that will not write malicious code.
My entire answer was going to be one sentence. We have to stop regulating ourselves into obscurity.
But I want to agree that those organizations that are really working on cybersecurity, trying to get the word out, trying to train people, you can't stop that. You just need to increase that. You have to keep going as hard as we can.
I think if we start to lift up every rock and try to find things that we're scared about, we're never going to end this panel. But I do want to bring it back a little bit to energy security. I told you I was going to keep on focusing on this, right? So talking about, okay, so we have to live with this equipment now. 30 years ago, we didn't plant the trees. And then now, well, we can't just say that like we're screwed now, don't do anything, right? To Jim's point. Like what do we do now? So traditionally, if you are a solar farm that produces, let's say, less than 75 megawatts, you don't need to report to NERC. You don't have any policy guidance for transparency or what you're doing or any of your like hygiene for security, whatever. You have no requirements. But now, if we look into the future, maybe just down 5-10 years, these smaller solar farms, PV installations or mid-scale PV installations are going to proliferate in this country. And so, maybe we can start from lowering the limits of how many megawatts you generate before you have to start reporting to the regulatory agencies that govern some of these security stances. That's one. Another thing that a lot of American companies now are doing is you take the batteries from China, let's say cattle battery, right? And you strip it of all the OT and IT equipment, and you just use the dumb batteries. A lot of companies are doing this now because, well, if you're going to strip out all the software and all the operational technology from this battery pack, and just use the battery cells themselves, and you build the software and the OT over it, then that mitigates the risk, right? So there are ways to get around it. We're not going to be able to invent ourselves or create a company that's going to compete with China's battery manufacturing sector. Not in the foreseeable future. We've already lost that. And also the US has tried numerous times and failed to make a battery company. So while we should continue to try to do that, we should also know that we have to live with this stuff now. And how do we do that? We make little adjustments here and there, common sense adjustments that makes sense for the people who are installing these solar and inverter-based resources, but also makes sense for government to enforce. And also, let's just have some policy guiding these distributed energy resources because we don't have any right now.
Thanks, Tim. Matt, anything to add?
I'll leave it there.
We're going to bring us back. That was truly a great discussion. Tim, I want to dig in a little bit more with you. I love the thread you're just going down around we can't compete in terms of battery manufacturing. And so just like DJI drones, you can wipe the firmware. Go ahead and let's address that. Are there other things that you think are reasonable that we could take on for energy infrastructure to address this? CHIPS Act, strategic alliances with ASML, TSMC, and other silicon chip manufacturing and manufacturers manufacturing equipment. Are there other things we can do with allies to better secure us on energy infrastructure?
Yeah, so this is a question that I always think of because when you look at an issue like I'm talking about, it's easier to spot the problem than to come up with solutions, right? Wouldn't you agree? a lot of times you can point to it and say like, this is a problem, but then when you ask the same person, like, what do you do about it? A lot of times the answers are unsatisfactory. But I think one of the satisfactory answers that we do have is that we do have a tremendous influence with our allies, and our allies do have a lot of manufacturing power that they can lend to us as well, right? Within this sector, right, Japan is a big leader. The Dutch are big leaders in producing energy equipment. Israelis are as well, the Koreans, right? There are a lot of alternatives, maybe a little bit more expensive than the Chinese products, but there are a lot of available equipment out there that doesn't touch the supply chain within China. And so I think that's a place that we can start, right? The more that we rely on these partners and the companies and enterprises that are located within our friendly allied countries, the more they will be able to lower their prices, become bigger and stronger, right? And in some ways, produce equipment and tools that we can use in our country more safely. So I think supporting the industry that is within this country is number one, of course, but then barring that, you also have to do everything in your power to try to support the industry in your allied nations so that you don't have to worry about the firmware or the software or the developed materials and systems from our adversarial nations.
Also sort of diversifies the attack surface.
Most definitely.
Okay. Matt, Frank, anything you want to add on that? Otherwise, I want to pivot a little bit.
We also know that one of those that you did mention, which is TSMC, they're sitting right off the coast of China, effectively, right? And protecting our partner there is a really big thing. They have literally the best chip manufacturing in the world. The United States has fallen behind, and hopefully Intel's next round will bring us back, but it's unclear at this point. So those are protecting those partners who are developing or at least producing and manufacturing the key components we need are super important. So there's a national security umbrella that America serves around the world, and that is to protect and help our partners, and that's something that we have to continue to do.
The only thing I would add is I would take it back to the mechanics triangle. You can have it good, cheap, or fast, but you can only pick two. And I would change the good, cheap, I'd change the fast to secure. You can only have it two ways. And understanding that really focusing on energy security can be good and it can be secure, but it's probably not going to be cheap and it's not going to make shareholders or industries the most money. And understanding that that's a necessary thing to provide the security that's necessary.
Yeah, and then the energy industry is also very unique in terms of its financial motivations, right? It's not like other industries. And so unless there is policy guiding that, then there is no reason why these energy companies will go for the more expensive alternative. Like the finances don't line up to do that, right? And so that's why I'm saying there needs to be some kind of governing policy around this to change something.
Absolutely. Going to pivot for a moment. During the morning panel, there was a little bit of a back and forth. I'd like to get all of your takes on it. We are, after all, having a discussion about data analytics within this. Cloud or on-prem, and why? Well, I know. You're welcome, everybody.
You want to start out?
Sure, I'll start just because we're an entirely on-prem company, because we know the vulnerabilities to cloud and also the comments of how expensive on-prem can be when you really amortize it over the length of data analytics and the processing capacity that's needed. Oftentimes those cloud bills escalate extraordinarily out of control. Ask anybody with an AWS bill in here, they probably would like it to be lower than it is, especially for the compute and the resources they're getting. So as you start building up these massive, massive data stores to need to process, yes, it's expensive to go on-prem, but it is more secure, and it gives you the ability to have that one-time purchase provide years and years of analytics without having that monthly bill hanging over your head.
So I'm gonna throw in on hybrid as an idea, okay? And so hybrid in this way: training's expensive, super expensive. inference is also super expensive. But when you're developing and you're doing your early training, hybrid really helps a lot. Smaller clusters, you can put them on site, you can control them, you can also control the IP, as you sort of point out. You tune them up. I mean, our keynote before this talked about the idea we had, we used to have little memories and little computers, so we had to get really smart about how we used them. And I think we got to get better about how we actually code this stuff. Like, it's easy to throw something in a language model. And language models have gone really down. From the time ChatGPT came out to now, it's about 1,200 times cheaper for them to run a query against it. That's a huge increase in a short time. But even smaller models, and we were talking about this early, smaller models are 1/30th of that cost, and you can run them on your laptop, and you can afford the equipment to do some local testing and whatnot. But once you tune them up, you're probably going to have to go to the cloud to get enough processing speed to run it. So to me, hybrid is where development and research goes. That's where you try to understand what are you ultimately going to deploy, test out smaller solutions, and you scale in the cloud as necessary. But I don't think you can get out of the cloud. I mean, we're going to see big guys run large data centers like the Memphis Center and whatnot, but I think it's really hard to go in reverse in data centers anymore. Clouds are they're still cheaper than owning your own data center of any scale. Okay, so to me, it's a hybrid. You learn to, it's crawl, walk, and then you run in the cloud.
With the advent of the technology we have coming out now and the extreme decreases in prices, edge compute is going to be a huge boon in the next couple of years. I'm sure lots of folks saw NVIDIA's Project Digits come out, or is about to come out in May. You're talking a petaflop in a computer that can sit, essentially almost in your pocket. They're so small, and those are only going to be $3,000. You can do an immense amount of edge computing, when you have those at the edges of your data centers, and then process the bigger things in cloud prem.
I've offered this up. I'm sorry, Tim. Do you have any strong opinions?
So there.
Okay. So I offered this up because you brought up the iron triangle, and I like to throw this out as sort of like it's a trick question, because you're gonna have to make a decision of somewhere on that triangle. Getting low latency for analytics in particular, trying to bring those models to an on-prem.
I had one thing, we have developers doing work, and what I've been doing recently is starting them on smaller equipment with smaller models.
Sure.
Okay, the goal being, learn to control the small one, right? Because if you got a lot of compute, you can make a lot of mistakes. You can eat a lot of CPU. You can write a big check to Amazon or Azure if you'd like to. But the reality is, from my point of view, is you start there, because they got to learn how to write and control for this environment. It's a very different thing that goes on. Funny thing is, the first time I ran something on my laptop I drained my battery. Even though it was plugged in, I didn't have a high return. The models eat that much energy. It's really easy to burn up a bunch of time in models, and you want to really understand what you're doing before you go do a lot of stuff in the cloud.
Well, I think the other side of this that we haven't really talked about is just we were saying sort of like, don't overregulate ourselves into not absurdity but obscurity. You have to both secure the data in the cloud, but that's just one part of the entire workload. Getting a model that you can trust or run it in a VPC that you can trust is an entirely different exercise, and how you actually trust whether it's a shared security model or something else, it gets back to this, like, the risk. We have to choose the risks that we're willing to tolerate.
But remember, though, it's not just a model. Like, we talk about models because that's easy to talk about, but it's a whole pipeline of analytics, pre-processing, staging the data, which can be poisoned. A lot of us are pulling packages. Python's very popular, so we're pulling packages off the net. They can be poisoned. I mean, there's a ton of building these things are non-complex. These are super complex software systems that you build, and you're running almost anything that you can think of that we've ever done in sort of analytical terms. You kind of almost put in your pipeline. Like, we even have modeling and sim stages in the backside of our pipeline to test the front side forecast we're doing. So, even bringing back modeling and sim into your data pipelines are where we're going to ultimately head. And so that's a ton of software. It comes from a bunch of places. We're leveraging a lot of other either vendors and or open source. And it also has another cybersecurity problem just sitting in it.
And on the regulation piece, because I'm sure that when I said regulate ourselves into obscurity, that tightened some folks up. What I really mean there is not that regulation isn't necessary and critical for that level of defense. It's how rapid we can adjust that regulation. And the fact is that it's just too slow right now for the defense that we need.
I couldn't agree more. A long process is not necessarily a thorough process.
That's right.
Yeah.
But again, I will say,
Some people have security clearance this year, I see.
well, I mean, I will say this, one of the problems with cybersecurity, unless you're a cybersecurity firm, is like no one really makes money on cybersecurity, right? If you're a cybersecurity firm, you make money on it. But the rest of us who kind of use cybersecurity, that's an expense when you think about it, right? You're not making money. I mean, you're making money that you maybe don't get broke into and you don't do ransomware. You're making it, it's an insurance more than it is anything. And that's kind of the hard part of cybersecurity is the costs are escalating, the need for it are escalating, and it is a burden on business. It just is. And, how we can, do this in a way that doesn't crush, our industry over time is really going to be tough because acceleration is money in this game. Right? You want to get better at cyber? Well, you go out and buy better cyber tools, better analysis, more red teaming, all that kind of stuff. And that's expensive. It falls right to the expense line, and got to pay for that. And then that gets passed on into the economy to your customers and whatnot, unless you're a cybersecurity company, because that's your job. But for the rest of it, it's a cost.
So with that, are our folks from Dominion Energy in the room? I had a question I didn't get to ask earlier. How many cybersecurity frameworks from a local, state, national, and continental level do you have to meet? Yeah, I was hoping one of them was in here. But it's to the same level of, yes, the frameworks are great. Implementation is the key. And when you have to meet 8 different frameworks that have 8 different requirements, now you have to have so many more providers, and it hits the bottom line even harder.
I mean, in the DoD world, right? Everybody understands that security is pretty high, and it's a complex problem, and even in a small, medium-sized company and a big lift, no matter how you do it, and the lift keeps moving. Again, it's a cost to our economy, I guess, is really the point overall.
In terms of the commentary about regulation, maybe our regulation needs to include a way of either incentivizing it or lowering the bar. This is a standard framework and how you can apply it, as opposed to just telling you these are the 279 controls that you have to apply in order to get FedRAMP High authorized. Like, you can provide. I'm speculating here, getting a little outside my lane, but perhaps that's an opportunity for us to lower the barrier. When Tim, you were talking about, we're probably gonna have to start looking at smaller producers and a way to pull them into the fold from a security perspective. We're gonna need to incentivize them and lower the barrier for them. Otherwise, we're putting a tax on, small and medium businesses.
I mean, the number of controls, cybersecurity controls, are going to go up for the foreseeable future. I don't see them going down anytime soon.
We saw that with CMMC compliance. It was mandated recently.
Second, check in with the audience. We've covered a lot of ground in this. I gave you an opportunity at the beginning to ask some questions. Anyone have questions for our panelists before we get too close to the end? Oh, we got a hand over on the side.
Gentlemen, I've got a question. You talked about computing power being a limiting factor. With things like Willow and those quantum chips, does that benefit or does that harm the system you guys are dealing with?
Quantum computing question?
Yeah, that's good. You mean to try that one? So quantum computing, the way it is today, is maybe slightly different than you might think. So there are different classes or different types of problems that can be solved on different types of architectures. You've heard us talk GPUs up here, which are big floating point math engines to some extent. Your laptop and all computers have a CPU, which is a central processing unit. Quantum computers are actually good for certain problem domains, not for every problem domain. Very good in things like optimization. You've heard them talk about cyber in the sense of breaking keys. Super good in a whole problem domain called NP complete or NP hard. These are just problems that scale quadratically. What that really means is that very simply is the more data you put into it, the more CPU it takes. Like by not by a few dollars, but by millennia, like thousands upon thousands, if not millions of years. So quantum computers is, for the most part, destined for those very narrow types of problems. So it's unclear what the cyber problem might be in quantum computing, but it's probably not going to solve some of these other issues. And we're still pretty far away, I think. I mean, we need to be 2,000-ish qubits to maybe really make a run at something like crypto keys at this point, and those are error correcting, and they're making a lot of headway on that, but they're not even close to that at this point. But it is good for other things, though, by the way.
Yeah, the other difficulty is infrastructure and the physical hardware requirements of the rooms where quantum computers are done.
You mean having the cooling system for absolute zero is really a problem? Yeah, it's a real problem.
Probably not going to be
Yeah.
in your kitchen anytime soon.
Right. Liquid nitrogen in
Yeah.
the data center.
Questions from the audience?
Can I make one comment on DeepSeek? Because it keeps coming up and everybody talks about this. There's a lot of misinformation about that particular thing going on, and because it kind of feels like China came on board and took $5 million and beat OpenAI. I mean, that's kind of the feel that it got in the media. That's really not exactly what occurred. It's owned by a company that's a hedge fund in China. It's probably known like a fairly good hedge fund in China who has been doing analytical research and research in models and trading and whatnot for quite some amount of time. They probably have somewhere in the range, it's known, at least publicly, they have about at least 10,000 GPUs, probably as many as 40 or 50,000. All that's paid by the hedge fund, right? And a lot of it's used to run the hedge fund, okay? So it wasn't like three guys got out of college, got $5 million and created a model that took down OpenAI. That's just not at all close to the truth. There was a lot of other research that went in. The cost of the research salaries didn't go into that. They were sort of stealing some reinforcement learning from OpenAI. So they were using other models on the internet to kind of correct their own models. So, despite what the media says, they did do some super remarkable things. I think the greatest thing that the most interesting they did was release their model weights, which is no one does. That's kind of like super intellectual property. What was really useful about it, though, is something that is coming. And I heard one of the panel talk about the fact that using AI in evidence is a real problem when you like do analysis with it. But one of the things they did do is they did release the reasoning chain from their model. And that's actually kind of useful because that's coming, and you can always see a little bit of it with ChatGPT if you're doing it. But basically the model exposes what its reasoning criteria was as the model runs. And so that will ultimately be used, I think, in investigations because you can actually see what the model was doing step by step by step. Interesting part is it does really weird things that you wouldn't expect. So that was, it does things that kind of look a little illogical because of the way the stats run, but that's going to get better and better. And so we will have a little bit of knowledge about what's going on in those black boxes and how their reasoning chains are working. And those reasonable chains, I think, will ultimately be legal.
Thanks. We're coming near the end. Want to sort of organize our thoughts to leave the audience with something pithy. Tim, I know we really started talking about the opportunity for energy infrastructure, especially around renewables. Can you wrap that up one more time just for the audience?
Yeah, sure. We have an opportunity here over not very long, about 5 to 6 years, to put in regulations to require some of these mid-scale PV installations to follow suit with some good security measures. For example, banning Huawei equipment from being installed into our solar grid might be a good start. SunGrow is, I would call it, the Huawei of the solar industry. 35% of their leadership is Communist Party members. Is CEO and founder is a prominent member of the CCP. There is ample evidence of their procurement relationships with the People's Liberation Army. Like, let's not put that kind of equipment into our power grid. So there are some easy steps that we can take to mitigate some of these risks, and I think the time is now, really, like it was yesterday or last year, but I think the time is now to do something about this very growing and important sector of energy, because as it is, we are quite stretched in terms of our power generation and our power demand. And so if we slip a little bit, or if the PRC can just knock off 1 or 2% of our power, it's not just going to knock out 1 or 2% of our power grid. It's going to have cascading effects. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, Tim. Planting the tree now instead of 30 years from now when we need it.
It's going to be too late to rip and replace, 5 years from now.
Matt, your opening comments about, we are getting a tremendous influx of data. We are also in the moment of having compute power to address that. Your final commentary, what should we be doing in this moment?
So across this industry and every industry, we look at cybersecurity in a relatively unique and novel way. But for so much of it, we're trying to plan for the highest and worst outcome of somebody creating novel code, somebody creating something that has wormed its way through our entire ecosystem. And on other panels and things, places I've sat, people have asked, like, is it time to introduce biometric security? Is it time to do those, higher tier things that are more expensive that are more secure? And my answer is that I really just want my mom to stop logging into her banking app when she's at the airport, right? It's getting the cybersecurity principles into every single person so that they understand that reusing passwords is a problem, that not using a password manager is a problem, because so many of the massive cybersecurity breaches, the hacks that have happened over the last couple of years, had nothing to do with novel exploits. It was just simply somebody using the password 100 times across their personal email, their government email, not having 2FA enabled, and just avoiding the things that are uncomfortable in daily life. If you really want to be secure and you're in any industry and in cybersecurity in general, it's extremely tedious and painful. It's checking your phone for an authentication app every single time you log into every single thing, and getting that as the basis for, especially the coming generations. Mm-hmm. That will be probably the most impactful thing to reduce the cybersecurity risk, is just fixing our password issues. As simple as that sounds.
No, it's usually it is. Often small things add up. Frank, closing remarks.
Yeah, I think I'm despite the fact I sound maybe pessimistic, I'm super optimistic in the data realm and even cybersecurity to some extent. I think we are getting better tools. I think they are force multipliers at some level. I think with language models, we're bringing reasoning to the game. That's a whole different thing that we haven't brought. So you're looking at both quantitative and qualitative data, and those can be married together. I think there's going to be a big win there. And I think that there's plenty of room for folks here at CNU and whatnot to enter that both those spaces and have quite a good career. At the same time, we're generating more data. We got more infrastructure that's cyber potentially vulnerable. We're all going to have to work. We're going to have to work to make it better. And I think we can. We certainly have some amazing brain power in the U.S. and some amazing tools and whatnot. And we need to leverage them.
Thanks so much, Frank. Folks, could you please join me in a round of applause to our panelists?